And now, Daljit Dhaliwal.
Rattled by last year's spike in global food prices, governments and corporations are racing to lease or buy farmland in developing countries. The African Union recently warned that Africa is giving vast tracts of farmland to rich nations without ensuring those on the world's hungriest continent benefit. Here to discuss the impact of this new trend on Africa is Chido Makunike, an agricultural exporter and a freelance writer from Zimbabwe. Chido, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
So talk a little bit about this growing trend. What's driving it? Who's involved? Where is it happening? How extensive is it?
Well, a lot of the questions don't have specific answers yet. A lot of questions, but the answers still need to be found out. But basically, who's driving it, who's involved? Seemingly everybody. A lot of people from Europe who want to grow biofuels in Africa, as well as in Latin America and Asia. Investors from the Middle East who want to grow food to import back into the Middle East. South Korea and Asian countries are also showing interest in investing not only within Asia but in Africa as well. And I think the biggest driver of this is food insecurity, the food scare that we had in 2008. And I think countries thought it's best for us to secure our own supplies of food, and if we can't grow our own food in our own countries, let's look for where we can grow it, but where we control the process.
And why do you think that it's happening mainly in Africa, a part of the world that already has a chronic shortage of food?
It has a chronic shortage of food, but it also has a lot of agricultural land that's available. A lot of it isn't well developed. So Africa is sort of the last great frontier for agricultural investment. There's a lot of potential there. What's been lacking is capital, know-how, and many other things. So people think, well, it could be a win-win situation where we give Africa the investment that it needs, and we get something out of the deal as well.
Well, how are these deals being handled? Are local farmers and communities being listened to? Are they having any kind of say in how these deals are done?
It's a good question. It's a little bit too soon to say because there's a lot of talk about these deals, but not many of them have been concluded, and we don't know all the facts yet. But that's sort of my concern, that these deals are potentially very beneficial to both sides, but a lot of the kinds of questions that you have asked are not being asked. Who's going to benefit? Are the local people going to benefit, etc.? So there is a real worry that these deals could be structured in a way that bypasses the needs of the local communities.
Well, some have even gone as far as to call it a land grab that is reminiscent of what happened during colonization. Do you think that it's as clear-cut as that?
I don't think it's as clear-cut as that, and I think it's premature, but it has a potential to be. Because not enough of the right questions are being asked, and I fear that some of the same mistakes are being repeated. But there is more awareness than during the time of colonization, so it can be prevented. But for these to be successful for the host countries, as well as for these to be profitable for the investing countries, there are a lot of questions that people are not asking. They're too much in a rush to get into it before they do their due diligence.
Right. Well, let's talk about the governments in Africa. Why would they not be sensitive to these issues?
I think part of it, I won't say they're insensitive to these issues, but there is
or
such
more
a pressure.
sensitized to it.
Yes, there's such a pressure for investment. There's such a pressure for development. There's such a pressure to provide markets for African farmers for their products. Such a pressure to create employment. Such a pressure for foreign currency. So I think these are some of the drivers.
So if these deals were handled properly, how do you think that Africa could benefit from this type of agricultural investment?
Well, one of the things that I advocate is that these companies should think about having African farmers supply them. I think it's okay for them to have big farms, as long as they're structured to protect the locals. That's fine. But I think there should also be a component where they actually train and ask the African farmers to grow whatever crop they're growing to supply them as well. So in that case, I think it's a win-win already because you provide extra markets for these farmers, which they're looking for, and yet you don't have to have them as laborers. So they have the dignity of holding onto their land and they're dealing with you as small scale, but
What
as
about-
business partners.
What about the ones that don't have titles to their land? I mean, this must involve quite a lot of small farmers in Africa.
Yes, this is the majority of small scale farmers in Africa, but that's not a problem.
But, I mean, if that land wants to be purchased or it wants to be leased, how do they prove that they own it or they have some kind of entitlement to it?
That's one of the reasons that these deals are so controversial, because most of this land is technically state land, but state land, according to the Western, paradigm, which is fairly recent to Africa, there are communities that have land claims to these areas that far precede the Western title deed system. So you could technically get title to land, but still have a lot of problems with these local communities. And my argument is that you should find a way of investing in which the people, the communities support you rather than fight you.
Well, it's a fascinating story, certainly a trend that needs to be watched. And thank you very much for coming on the program and talking about it.
Thank you very much, Dajit.